using Ghana time, since this is KNUST, and we've been taught by our Vice Chancellor and Pro-Vice Chancellor, who always, in every program, reports for the program 20 minutes before the start of the program. And one thing that I learned from our Chancellor, Otufo-Settu, the second, is that every time we have congregation, he makes sure, and he has any other program, he makes sure he's on time. So he comes even before his other sub-chiefs will be here. He says that this is an academic institution, and we always have to learn to be punctual. Without much ado, I'll ask all of us to break into our sessions. We will come back at exactly 10 minutes to 11 o'clock. 10 minutes to 11. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful presentation.
Colleagues, good morning. Sorry we are behind time, so we need to start. In fact, bear with us because the number of presentations that we have today, some of our presenters are not in. So we have even collapsed the other group into the other room. And then we'll have here, so we'll have 2 rooms presenting. So please, we are about to start. So Doc will start for us. So pay attention and then listen to him. He has about 10 minutes to do the presentation. Doc, thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. So, good morning, seniors and colleagues. I'm presenting on indigenous knowledge and coastal livelihood resource utilization, the case of 2 coastal communities in the central region of Ghana. And this is the outline of my presentation from the introduction to the conclusion and recommendations. So we say that the environment provides 3 basic services to humanity by serving as a place for settlement, resource for our sustenance, and as a waste repository. And when we come to coastal environment, about 10% of Ghanaian population, directly or indirectly, benefit from the subsector in terms of employment. This means that we have to protect the environment in order to survive as humans. And the SGD 14.7 says that there's a need to increase the economic benefits of the resources, but also from a very sustainable way. For this reason, the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the World Conference on Science in Budapest, 1999, have all said that in protecting the coastal environment, you can't do away with the indigenous knowledge of the people, where indigenous knowledge means accumulated knowledge system through experience and people's awareness about the environment within their cultural context. And this will improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and the long-term sustainability of such coastal environment. And if you look at Africa, Côte d'Ivoire, there's a community called Zapobili that have used this indigenous knowledge system to protect thousands of hectares of their forests. And then even in Ghana, in Upper West region, the people of Naha have used the indigenous knowledge system to protect forests such a way that if you dare touch it, you are made to go through certain rituals. And for that matter, people have not been utilizing the forest ungodly. But then the problem is that when you come to the coastal belt, the livelihood resources are dwindling at a very, very higher rate, where there's decline in fish stock, as indicated by Akuti and Sami in 2015. There's also a problem of sand mining that is leading to coastal erosion, as said by Pichaya 2017, Jonah and Adubuah in 2016. When you come to government level, various governments over the years have tried to solve the problem of coastal resource degradation without inculcating the knowledge of the local people, without involving the very traditional rulers who are the custodian of these resources. Many researchers have also used these same research approaches to look at indigenous knowledge and how they are protecting agricultural lands and forests without focusing on the coastal resource. Those who have looked at coastal resources have also limited themselves from the geographical point of view, without looking at the human nature, the indigenous knowledge, from the sociological point of view. Therefore, this study sought to explore how the people have used the indigenous knowledge to influence their utilization of the coastal resources. So the study will be beneficial as it provides a database which can form a basis for theories and knowledge acquisition. And in terms of policy, the study will be the findings could be used by the Fisheries Commission as part of its strategies of sustainable coastal livelihood resource management, and that will enhance the sustenance of the resource base. The study was underpinned by symbolic interactionism from the Bloom's point of view, which situates on three basic principles: that human beings interact with the environment based on the meanings they attach to them. So in this case, the coastal people, using their indigenous knowledge, will interact with the coastal resource based on their understanding that or meaning that attach to the resource. And that these meanings are derived from their interactions with one another and with the environment. But then he also says that the meanings, as time goes on, go through a period of interpretive modification, where the people will give different meaning, and for that matter, that will influence the way they interact with their resources. Based on this, I used philosophical approach that will give better understanding of the problem. And for that matter, interpretivism was used, where the meanings from the people's own point of view was the basis for analysis. And for that matter, I used qualitative approach to conduct the study. And the design was ethnographic case study, where I had to stay with the people for some time. I did not cover so many communities so that I could get detailed information from the people. So these were my participants. For the sake of time, I cannot go through everything. So I have the sample size for two communities, Mori and Apam. And the instruments were largely interview guide, focus group discussions, and then I also had observation guide. So in all, 36 participants were involved in the study. And of course, the analysis was based on narratives that were given by the people. And then ethical considerations were not also ignored, where informed consent were sought, confidentiality and anonymity, ethical issues were taken into consideration. The findings. It came out that the local coastal people had multiplicity of utility value for these resources, where their main resources that they depended on were the sea, the sand, the gravels, the lagoons, the land itself. But then, a greater number of them depended on the sea for fishing, and the fishing were for both domestic and commercial purposes, where almost everybody in the communities, in one way or the other, depended on the fishing activities, either by fishing themselves, mending canoes and nets, or as fishmongers. The sand and pebbles, or gravels, also played an important role in their livelihood situations, where they use the sand for building, and they claim that the sand from the coastal or the beaches provided the smoothness of all sand that they could get. So when they used to build, it was nicer than sand from the inland. But then, previously they were not harvesting it for sale. But in recent times, because of economic issues or livelihood issues, they have started selling this sand to people from outside their communities. But then, they did not, or they do not even go for fishing on Tuesdays. Since to them, going to fishing on Tuesdays will affect the peace of the deities in the sea or the water bodies. And this supposed mean that the deities have to rest, and for that matter, there's no need to disturb them. And this has also been supported by Ansan et al. 2020, Ajay and Sika Bright 2019, and then Anochi et al. 2015. Apart from these, they also rely on salt from the sea. In fact, when we come to Maury, the sea, they had not engaged much in salt production, but Apam had a huge salt industry that they produce salt for consumption, for processing their fish, and also for sale. And in fact, the community had partnered with a private partner that produced salt for the community. And then when the profit came, they would divide it into three. The community would take one part, and then the capitalists or the industry owners will also take two thirds. The sand was not only used for livelihood, but then also for recreation, where after work, they will have to depend on the sun. During occasions, they have to go to the beaches to relax and also swim for recreational purposes. Apart from the livelihood utilization of these resources, they also had medicinal use for the coastal resource, where the people claimed that the sea was good for treating all manner of skin diseases, like chickenpox, that when you get it, you only have to go and bath in the sea and you are healed. And then if you have piles, what locally called cocoa, just go and bath in the sea, wash the private part with the water, and then you are healed. Then for waist pains, you can also enema with seawater, fetch it, enema, and then you get healed. And also those who have hernia, as I can call them, when you have it, you enema the seawater and you get healed. It can also be used as eye drops for Apollo and all manner of eye problems. That's the reason why during the COVID time, they refused to adhere to the social distant policy by the government, claiming that so far as they are living by the sea and they bath in them, there's no way COVID could catch them. So truly, during the time, I was collecting this data at that period and realized that they wouldn't bother to have contact because to them, COVID cannot survive when they bath in the water, but the sea. And that's also been supported by other authors that I've labeled here. Then, apart from this, they also have the metaphysical use of the resources, where the lagoons and the sea played pivotal role in dealing with their spiritual matters. To them, even not only the traditionalists, pastors also came there for the seawater to perform their rituals for healing and also for baptism. They baptized their new converts into in the sea. And to them, the moment you bath in the water body, ghosts and other spirits cannot harm you. But then, if you use the sea, they believe that it will help you to deal with so many things, either for good or for bad. The water, in terms of the spiritual aspect. And that when people committed an offense and denied their crime, they will use the lagoon at Mori as trial by ordeal, where they will ask you to swallow a raw fish, a particular fish, and that if you are innocent, nothing will happen to you, but then if you are guilty, within some days, your tummy will start swelling. At times, too, they will let you drink the lagoon water after rituals that have been performed by the traditional priests. If you are guilty of it, no matter where you are, your tummy will start swelling, and then they have to bring you back to the deity for them to perform proper rituals before you are healed. So the meanings that they are tied to these things influence the way they interacted with the lagoon, especially in Mori. And for that matter, they did not touch it just anyhow. But then, the seawater, apart from being this good or perform this metaphysical function, since people have different motives, they say some use the seawater for good purpose and others for bad purpose. And for that matter, they had to make sure that before you fetch the water for such purposes, you need to drop a coin. And you don't have to use a metal object to fetch the water. And by so doing, to avert any ill motive that the person might have had. So these are some of the narratives that the participants give. And that also support Bruner's argument that people interact with the environment based on the meanings they attach to them. I'm told I have 3 minutes. So these are some of the things that people said. They also said, I found out that how did they get to know about this? About the even presence of fishes in the sea. And they said traditionally, they use the smell of the sea or the waves that will come to tell them, no, there's fish available. At times they look at the predatory animals or birds in the sky. Where they are gathered, they see that yes, there are fishes around. At times they also looked at the lunar bodies or the celestial bodies, the moon, the stars, to either locate the fishes or for their direction. And the pebbles or the sand, they also said that yes, in June, July, is where they get enough pebbles for harvesting, for building and other purposes. And these are supported by Siadonko 2011, that they use the lunar objects as a guide for fishing and direction. But then, as time passes, things are changing. According to them, nowadays, people don't follow these metaphysical or these indigenous knowledge that people had about the resources. And for that matter, it is affecting the way they interact with the resources. And I itemize some of them that internal and external factors, where the internal factors or challenges were livelihoods. Because of livelihood, they are hungry, so they can't allow certain things, the fishes to remain there. So even nowadays, they are going for fishing on Tuesdays upon the performance of certain rituals by the chiefs. The socialization process is also changing. Now there's the fear for the supernaturals have also reduced. And then the external factors, they're looking at the emergence of Christianity that has derailed many of the belief systems, upsurge of population, socialization of immigrants who have come to live there, who don't want to abide by the rules, and then Western education. So these are also supported by these authors. That is Scciological and Anthropological, and then Bloom's propositions. So conclusions and recommendation. So the study then concludes that the communities have over the years accumulated indigenous knowledge through their worldview to identify and sustainably utilize the coastal livelihood resources at their disposal based on the meanings they attach to the resources. However, both internal and external factors have combined to derail the very relevance of these indigenous knowledge of the communities that ensures sustainable utilization of the livelihood resources. There's therefore the need for collaboration between the state officials in the fishing industry and the traditional authorities so as to find ways of coming into compromise on the use of traditional and modern methods of resource conservation. Thank you for your attention.
Presentation. Colleagues, the floor is open for questions, comments, and all that. Any comments for Doc? Yes, for Boat.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Doc, for your presentation. I came late, but I think this one will be okay. I'm wondering which of the SDGs you think your topic is going to help us address, and looking at the situation on the ground per your study, are we likely to attain that goal, please? Thank you.
Yes, I mentioned SDG 14 and point 7, where we talk about making economic benefit from the resources at the same time making sure that there's sustainability of this resource for future generation. And for that matter, in this work, we are saying that the indigenous knowledge that people had supported this kind of stance by the SDGs. But then, because of population growth and other factors, things are not working. And for that matter, for us to achieve that goal, then the government, through fishing commission, Fisheries Commission, should make sure that they include the chiefs in making policies, like the closed system, and they had different view about the breeding periods of the fishes. They looked at May, June, and government is talking about August. So in this case, if you don't collaborate with them to find ways of even letting them know whether what their knowledge is false or what, then definitely you always have a challenge with them when you want to implement such policy.
Just a follow-up question, can I? Okay. Have you shared this information with the policymakers on the ground where you picked the study?
Not yet.
Not yet. And do you have any plan to do that per your dissemination strategy?
I have to. I will do it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I also join hands in thanking you for how far you've come with your research. It's indeed an important work, but I have multiple questions, but I would like to know, my question will also be influenced by knowing, so how are you framing this study in terms of the indigenous knowledge construction? I want to know which sociological lens that you are looking at this from, because you talk about SDG and then you talk about that the idea that to help preserve the environment and all that. So I'm wondering, because some of your narratives may not be mainstream science. I know that there are different sources of truth, but the scientific knowledge, it's something that as we know, that the scientific knowledge is subject to, other forms of interpretation. So if someone says, I have hernia, and that if I go bath in the seawater, the hernia goes away. And then a researcher hears this and does not subject this to, it's a form of science, don't get me wrong, but does not subject this to verifiable scientific, knowledge. That's why I want to know from what sociological lens, the theory, that are you framing your work? Then on the basis of that, I can appreciate what you're saying.
So that's why I say that the symbolic interactionism is telling us that people interact with resources based on the meaning they have for food. So now the understanding is that they see, all right, apart from being a natural object, can also have metaphysical property or medicinal property. And by virtue of their experience, they have interacted with these resources for over a period of time. They have come to the realization that anytime they have hernia or this kind of disease, and they apply it, and it works. You have to appreciate it from the person's point of view. So that's what I seek to present.
So this is the old age debate. So the fact that it is an interactionist doesn't mean that there is no social structure within which you are operating. There is a larger social structure. You can have your own meanings, but that meaning take place within a broader social structure. That's what I'm saying. So the fact that you think that you go and bath in some river body or the sea and your hernia goes away does not mean that. So it's just like COVID-19. That we know you have been diagnosed of COVID-19 and that you say when you take a herbal concoction, the COVID-19 will go away. Does not mean that in the public space that we know you haven't gone through the societal values of what it means to be treated of COVID-19, that you will be accepted in that public space. That is what I'm saying, that you need to subject that meaning-making by an individual within a broader social structure. And I thought that you haven't done that well, and that would create a lot of loopholes in your study. So maybe think about it, or you can respond.
Okay. So, Doc, I think you will continue the conversation, even from here up to Cape Coast. Yes, Robert Amzoya.
Thank you so much, Chair. And in your presentation, I'm also with the latecomers, forgive me. You mentioned about the fact that tradition became weak, and you gave factors why belief system became weak. But how did you see the manifestation of the weakening of the belief systems? For instance, did they start going to fish on Tuesdays to defy the gods, or stop dropping coins in the sea before fetching water? How can we see the manifestation of the weakening of the belief system? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, in the presentation, I made mention of the fact that because of the weakening of these knowledge base, nowadays, people are flouting the Tuesday fishing rule. And I cited Prof. Ansan and this team who also did the work and realized that they attributed to the fact that now it came out that some of the traditional areas on Tuesdays, when there's a need for them to raise some money for certain social activities, they will perform certain rituals and allow people to go for the fishing on Tuesday. And that has also opened the gate for people to also start doing that. So now people go for fishing on Tuesdays. In the past, the moment you go for fishing on Tuesday, they will seize the catch and take you through certain rituals. But nowadays, my findings show that the elders themselves, at times, could gloss over their favorites, their deviant behaviors of their favorites, and for that matter, other people also think that they can do same. So now, because of this, things are changing.
I also understand that these systems were put in place to protect the environment. So don't go and fish on Tuesdays to protect the fish with that people overfishing. Don't go to forests or go to this area because they want to protect the vegetation of that area. So don't you think in this context, tradition has a role to play? And if we start defining tradition, it might have some consequences on the environment, the sea included.
Exactly, Prof. You see, traditional societies at times had scientific motive for bringing out certain spiritual or taboos, let him put it that way. But they do not let you know the motive behind. So don't go to fishing on Tuesday because the sea goddess that they refer to as Mami Wata will have to rest. But in their mind, they want to protect the resource. And since we have started flouting this taboo and or the norms, definitely degradation will be the consequence. The reason why I'm recommending that the Fisheries Commission or the fisheries industry, from the government point of view, should always collaborate with the traditional rulers who are the custodians of these values, these taboos, and the rest, so that you see a parity. Because if you allow only the traditionals to also use their traditional approach to run their system, it may not have so much effect, because nowadays the state has power over the traditional ruler who cannot make laws. But then the state can partner with the traditional authority, give them some room to operate so that they can implement their taboos or the norms that are, and their customs that are situated, found within their own context.
Okay, one more question, Prof. Akoko, so that we, okay, after Prof. Akoko, Prof. Ansan.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello. I just came in, but listening to you, I realized that we already know all that I'm hearing. You see, and I think eyes on the fact that what are the scientific, also the sociological, vitamins in the research that you are doing? That's what we are interested. Because these things we already know. Because in my village, for instance, there's a river there that you dare not fish in it, So the fishes are like this. You see, but interestingly, when if they swim to the other rivers, that's why you can eat it, you can catch it. So the protection and all these we know. So what is the sociology, and how do you arrive at these issues as a sociologist? This is, I think, what we are interested in.
So this one, I think, is a contribution. So, Prof. Ansan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anochi, for your presentation. Because you are situating this work in the context of the SDGs, I would recommend that in your discussions, you show how the erosion of some of these practices are going to have implications for the achievement of the goal 14.7. So that at least we will see the drift of the nexus between the local knowledge and the achievement of the SDG goals. I would also recommend that the framing of the indigenous knowledge should be expanded a bit. Definitely once this presentation is going on, people would have to appreciate the nuanced texture of indigenous knowledge. And of course, even appreciate the presence of science in indigenous knowledge. Yeah. So that what Dr. Fiabe is saying would also find its way in your discussion. So that flow would be there. Because if you look at the Tuesday non-fishing day, there is a science in it. The science in it is organizational. It's also about the protection of the environment, some of which you mentioned. And the fact that the people were so anthropological in using Tuesday as a non-fishing day because the day itself coincided with, certain activities which didn't make them see the whole idea of fishing on that day very necessary. And when you talk to people in Mori, they tell you that day, that was when they were, and Mori is the hub of all these practices, because that is where fishing actually started. So that was the day they were using for certain rituals, burying their dead and all those. But times have changed. So how do we integrate these changes, some of which we've seen, as responsible for the erosion, being integrated into a current wave of the integration a current wave of indigenous knowledge system, which can then be incorporated into our fisheries management systems. So I think these are some of the things that can also be taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, so, but before we end it, I was also thinking of asking you the local definition of the environment and how they perceive it. In that case, most of the things that you talked about, you can even situate them in sociology, as colleagues are saying. And because you did ethnography, I was also expecting to see some local names which could be translated, or the literal meanings.
Okay.
In English. That will make the work stronger. Because it's like these ones that you have put up, maybe some of the things are from your own understanding, but in the local way they put it, and you are getting the literal meaning in English.
I get you.
Carry out
the names are there, like
yes.
there's the called Umra,
Okay.
they are
All
there.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Also include them.
Right. So, look, thank you very much for
And
your
thank you too
presentation.
for the
So the next person. You have 10 minutes to present your work.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
So my name is Albert Nidodo, and I'm presenting on Chinese industrial trawling in Ghana, vulnerabilities and coping strategies among artisanal fishers and coastal dwellers. This work is part of my MPhil thesis, which was supervised by Professor John Windianson. So my presentation will take this outline. I'll begin with the introduction and then end with the conclusions and recommendations. And when we look at current happenings that are taking place in international development, there is a pattern that has been observed, given the fact that international development cooperation is taking a new form, where support or partnership is not only coming from countries who are in the global south, but also coming from some other countries not coming from countries who are in the global north, but also the shift is moving to support that comes from countries within the global south. And so the shift is that there has been that sequence moving away from the north-south cooperation to the south-south cooperation, where we find countries within the global north collaborating among themselves to advance development. Now, it is within the context of this south-south cooperation that countries such as China, Brazil, and India have emerged as strong economies who are capitalizing on their relationship with other countries in the global south to invest and become strong partners for countries within the African region. Now, within this context, China has also developed their own going global policy, where the government of China supports both state and non-state businesses to invest and move into different kinds of operations in Africa. And in Africa, we can see that Chinese companies are mainly involved in agriculture and some other forms of industries, which are serving as important sources of development cooperation for countries within the region. China is also known to have the largest fishing industry in the world, and because of that, they are involved in a lot of fishing activities within Africa. So Ghana, Guinea, Mauritania, Sierra Leone are all countries where we can see Chinese distant water fishing companies and vessels operating in many parts of these countries. And it's been established that the presence of the Chinese within these fishing industries of the countries in Africa has very significant implications as far as food security and livelihoods of fishers are concerned. Now, in Ghana, even though the laws do not allow foreigners to own vessels within the industrial trawling industry, it's been observed that about 100% of the vessels operating in Ghana are connected to Chinese companies. And now this is because the work of Gsaa and Afo 2018 have revealed that vessels that are used for industrial trawling are quite expensive. And so local Ghanaians don't have the capital to be able to afford these vessels. And so they partner with these Chinese companies and then register the vessel in the name of a Ghanaian company in order to obtain licenses to fish within the industrial trawl sector. Now, given the fact that fishing in Ghana serves as an important source of livelihood to about 10% of the population, China's presence in the industry has become an issue of important concern to many scholars within academia. And research that has been done over the years have proven that Chinese presence within the fishing industry has very significant implications for the livelihoods of fishers. However, if you look at the works of people like Penny et al. 2017, reports by the EJF in 2018, 2019, 2020, even a recent study that was done by Liu et al. In 2023 revealed that there are livelihood implications that affect fishers by virtue of the presence of the Chinese. However, because many of these studies have been largely qualitative in nature, the magnitude of the effects or the magnitude of the implications have not been adequately articulated. And today, as we are discussing about sustainable development goals, this work is also of importance because given the fact that the goals 1, 2, 5, 8, and 14 are all related to very relevant issues that can be connected to livelihood. What livelihoods has effect on poverty reduction, on hunger, on gender equality, on decent work of fishers, as well as even protection of the sea has also significant implications for the goal that's related to life below water. And so this work is situated within these goals. And as I discussed, we will see how best these ones are useful for the achievement of these goals. And so the work sought to look at mainly vulnerabilities of fishers and also some of their coping strategies. However, what I did in this study was also introduce the gender dynamics into these discussions. And so if it's about vulnerabilities, how do we see the disparities between male and female fishers? If it's about the coping strategy, also, we're also trying to examine the differences that we can see in terms of male and female fishers. Now, this was important because the fishing industry in Ghana is a very gendered occupation, where there are clearly defined roles for both men and women. And so whatever affects the environment may not produce the same outcomes. And that is why I gave this gender lens to this work. The work was actually underpinned by two theories, political ecology and then feminist political ecology. The basic assumption is that when it has to do with the environment, there are political, economic, legal, and social issues that affect the environment and also affect the way that individuals benefit from these environments. And so, if you look at the work of Bennett's 2019 years, revealed that the oceans in the sea are currently politicized, in a sense that whatever affects the ocean are not happening in a vacuum. There are significant political, economic issues that are connected to the environment, which has implications on livelihoods and how people benefit from these resources. For instance, if you look at the presence of Chinese within Ghana's fishing industry, it has not happened in a vacuum. Ghana's relations with China, development cooperation between China and Ghana have all informed the extent to which Chinese companies have found themselves within the fishing industry. And even though the laws do not allow foreigners to own vessels, reports that have been done by Akalo et al. 2018 and some by EJ have revealed that there are serious connections or partnerships between some political actors and these Chinese companies who have vessels within the industry. However, one argument that has been leveled against political ecology is that when it comes to do with the environment, male and female don't have the same demands on the natural resources. There are gender roles that also have implications on the extent to which men and women depend on the environment. And so the feminist political ecology introduces the gender side to this discussion to ensure that issues that affect women are also brought to bear within the discussion of the environment. And in this work, I draw on these theories to explain the various dynamics that occur between the male and female fishers. I also drew from the sustainable livelihoods approach and Amartya Sen's capabilities approach. Now, the sustainable livelihoods approach has 5 main capitals that are related to livelihood. So there is natural, there is physical, there is social, there is environmental, there is financial, and there is human. So I sought to examine the livelihood implications across these 5 types of capitals, because that is what will help to tell exactly how the presence of the Chinese has affected the livelihoods of fishers within the community that was selected. And also, I also drew from the capability approach because livelihoods do not stand on its own. When people depend on the sea for resources, the goal is that they will be able to have what they need to meet their needs. So I also sought to explore how people's capabilities have either been enhanced or affected by virtue of the presence of the Chinese. And so out of the livelihoods approach, I developed these indicators which served as a basis for measuring the impact we see on the financial capital, natural assets, physical, human, and then the social capital. I also adopted the pragmatic research philosophy in this way, given the fact that existing studies have been largely qualitative in nature. I sought to draw from both qualitative and quantitative method. The quantity helps to present the magnitude of the vulnerabilities and the strategies, and also some bit of qualitative work was used to situate the findings within appropriate context that exists within the communities. And so I drew on surveys, group discussions, and then interviews for the work. Now to the results. Now, in terms of livelihood vulnerabilities, this is the index that I generated after the findings, and this is an accumulation of the various indicators for each of the specific livelihood assets. Now, in terms of financial capital vulnerability, I found out that the vulnerability index was 64%. Now, this index means that if you select 500 of the fishes out, if you select 100 of the fishes out of the entire population, you'll find that there are 64 of them who have been exposed to some form of financial capital vulnerability as a result of the presence of the Chinese. And this includes issues such as decline in income, decline in ability to buy fishing inputs, decline in savings, and some other forms of financial vulnerabilities which serve as threats to the livelihoods of these fishes. Across the other assets also, we see that in terms of natural assets, it's about 60, there's 37 for physical, but if you look at the human and social capital, we do not see so much of huge vulnerabilities. And this is because in terms of human capital, I sought to examine issues such as how has the presence of the Chinese affected fishers' ability to engage in other livelihood alternatives, or affected their ability to, let's say, learn new skills for their fishing. And because the Chinese do not have direct contacts with the fishers in this regard, we do not see so much of vulnerabilities in that area. Where we see them is across the three, which is the financial, natural, and then physical asset. The physical asset is the area where we see that by their trawling activities, many fishers have had their boats, their nets, and some other forms of equipment destroyed because of the activities of the Chinese. Now, in the qualitative data, there are some reasons to support these things. For instance, one fisher revealed that things were not so much difficult for them before the presence of the Chinese. And if you see the narrative, you can find out that a fisher could make about 100 Ghana cedis in a day when the Chinese were not present. However, in this time, he makes about 50 Ghana cedis, which is less than what they would have made if the Chinese were not present. Now, this is because the Chinese, even though they're supposed to fish within the deep seas and target fishes that are meant for export, they end up moving into the zone that are reserved for the artisanal fishers. And so they end up competing with them over their fish catch. So fishermen go to the sea and sometimes come back home with virtually no fishes at all. And this also has effect on the women, because when they don't get enough fishes, the prices go up, they become more expensive, and so women are not able to purchase fishes from the artisanal fishers, and that also affects the market dynamics and sale of fish within the community. Now, the challenge has also been that because the fishes are expensive, people are not able to purchase so much from the women, and that affects their income, their ability to provide for their families, and even the general economic activity that goes on within the communities. And so now we can see from political standpoint that the presence of the Chinese is creating room for inequalities, creating room for social justice, where we can see that the stronger countries like China and their vessels who are operating in Ghana are benefiting on one side because they are making money from the fishes they are catching for exports. They are also selling their bycatch in Ghana, popularly known as cycle, where they also make income from these sources. But however, our local fishers seem to be excluded from this, and they are the ones who have been exposed to more of the vulnerabilities and challenges that are associated with the presence of the Chinese. Now, in terms of the gender, the study interestingly found out that the men were exposed to more vulnerabilities than the women. Now, this contradicts popular arguments by people like Torrell et al. 2019, who have revealed that in the fishing industry, women are more vulnerable than men. However, in this study, I discovered that the men were the ones who were exposed to more of the vulnerabilities. Now, this is because women are on the post-harvest side of the industry, and so they do not have direct contact with the Chinese, but the men are the ones who go to the sea, and so they are the ones that the Chinese are competing with over their catches. And so whilst they are coming home with limited catches, the women do not feel the impact so much, because for them, they are able to obtain fishes from the sale of the bycatch, which gives them double sources of fish. So whether the fishermen are able to bring in fish or not, they can also buy the bycatch, process, and sell to meet their needs. And I found out that in the midst of these things, fishers had adopted various kinds of strategies to help them cope. About 84% of the fishers agreed that they had adopted certain levels of coping strategies. And now, these were the strategies that the fishers had adopted. They have been ranked based on the level of dependence on these strategies. And we can see that increasing fishing efforts was still number one. This is because the fishers revealed that they do not have alternative sources of livelihood. And so even in the midst of the vulnerabilities, they still depend on fishing for their livelihoods. There are other mechanisms such as reducing food consumption, reducing savings and spending. Now, all these are what Saleh et al. Describes as micro-level or survival strategies. These strategies are not robust enough to enable the fishers to be able to cope with vulnerabilities. And you can see that for many of them, they are depending on their family, they're depending on their partner, depending on friends to survive amidst the challenges they are exposed to by virtue of the presence of the Chinese. And I sought to examine also the gender dynamics. And you can see that for male, increasing fishing efforts seems to be number one. Use of service is number two. But when you look at that of the females, you can find out that reducing household food consumption was number one. This is because the gender dynamics and the gender roles that men and women play within the family system also affects how they decide to cope when they are exposed to certain vulnerabilities and challenges. And so in this study, I conclude that the presence of the Chinese in Ghana has exposed artisanal fishers and coastal dwellers to a lot of vulnerabilities, moving from decrease in income, decrease in access to fish, which affects their capability and their ability to meet their needs and that of their families. However, we find out that the vulnerabilities are more common among the male fishers than the female fishers due to the places they occupy within the value chain in fisheries. And also, we can see that even though fishers had adopted certain mechanisms to cope, they are not robust enough, and so their ability to adapt amidst Chinese trawling activities has become a challenge because many of these strategies are micro-level strategies which are not strong enough to help them cope with the various forms of vulnerability they are exposed to. And so we recommend in this study that there is a need for an effective law enforcement regime which will ensure that these Chinese vessels are monitored effectively to make sure that they are operating within the zones that are reserved for them so that they do not encroach into the areas of our artisanal fishers, so that both they themselves and our local fishers cannot make the most out of the fisheries resources. And given the fact that we are discussing the sustainable livelihood goals, what is happening is that the presence of the Chinese is posing as a threat to our natural resources. And it is defined by Chambers and Conway that a resource is seen to be sustainable if it can cope with the stresses and without compromising the possibility that future generations will also benefit from these resources. And so the issue of the Chinese finance industry needs to be considered because, in a sense, it is compromising the ability that future generations who will come after people who are there currently may not be able to maximize the benefits that our current fishers are getting from the resources. And if you look at the gender dynamic, you can clearly see that even though arguments have been that most of the time women in the industry are the ones who are vulnerable, here we are seeing that in the presence of the Chinese, the male fishers become more vulnerable than the women. And so efforts that are aimed at addressing gender equality should also consider the specific challenges that men are facing within this particular industry, such that the efforts are made in such a way that it can also speak to the needs of men and not that of women alone. Thank you.
All right. Albert, thank you very much for your presentation. So, colleagues, the floor is open for questions, contributions. Dr. Ray.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very good presentation, and just to also say that I'm happy to sit, to listen to you. This is my first time listening to you, and it makes me proud as a department that an MPhil student is very great. Also means that you may have received a good supervision. That does not also take away the fact that you are good. I mean, anybody who has listened. So it can make your work better. So I'm interested in two things. The gender analysis, and then the constant use of the presence of the Chinese. So I like to know, is it the presence of the Chinese that is the threat, or the use of the more advanced, means of catching fish? That is the problem. So if we had a Korean, an American, whatever, on the sea, would that also be a threat? So you need to answer that question. That's the first one. Maybe let me allow you to respond to that.
Yes, I think it is clear that it is the type of fishing that they are engaged in that actually serves as a threat, because they are doing industrial trawling. They have huge vessels, huge nets compared to our artisanal fishing. So that is the
political economy. Although I also agree that the racial economy is important, because the environment that you find yourself also has implications for access to the kind of, we find ourselves in, it's very unfortunate. So please make that clear. The gender base, I think you should be very careful, because the feminists will come at you. Because they will come at you, because you see, you rightly said that previous research is making the argument that when it comes to fishing, the fishing industry, women are more vulnerable. And you rightly said that, women are vulnerable in your analysis because they are the other tier of the fishing chain in terms of the processing thing. So the men, when it comes to your research, the men shows that when it comes to fishing, you say fishing.
No, I don't mean that. The gender dynamic has to do with the fact that the place the women occupy within the value chain, they are at the post-harvest level. Yeah. And at that level, the argument is that the fish has gone through certain processes which increases the value. So the price goes up, and then women are able to make more from the fish than the men who are just involved in the harvesting, where at that level, he has not gone through any processing which will add value to the fish. So the men are just involved in the harvesting, but the trading and all other activities that go after the harvesting are done by the women. And in this study, you find out that because the women are at the post-harvest level, they had, for instance, they had two sources of supply of fish. They can either go to the artisanal fishermen to buy fish, or they can go to the sale of the bycatch from the Chinese, which is called Scciological. So the women have those two sources. So they can buy from the artisanal fishermen, or they can go to the Scciological traders and purchase fish to process and sell. But for many of the men, they are only limited to going to the sea for fish. And so if they go and they do not make enough catch, then that has implications for their livelihood. Yeah. But the women have that kind of...
Yeah, but that doesn't mean, you see, so your research, what you should rather be saying is that in your research, when it comes to vulnerability, in terms of fish production, comparatively, you are saying men are vulnerable. But you must also appreciate that when it comes to fish production, there are more men involved than there are women. It doesn't mean, one of your colleagues in the fish mommy thing talks about the idea that women also own canoes. Women also are also in the fish production. Yes, but generally, comparatively, there are more men than there are women. So obviously, if that field, there are issues about vulnerability, the probability is that men will be more affected than women. So you should engage in that so that you limit your vulnerability to the issue about fish production. So that is an important contribution to the field of gender scholarship. And so that can challenge the Bridgham's analysis about all that. So that is a fantastic way. But try and limit your vulnerability to fish production, because there are vulnerabilities also in other facets of the fishing industry. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Just to add to what Doug said, please, see the word gender, me as a sociologist, I get worried when we, looking at sex, we say gender. And that's what Doug is saying. You look at who does what. It's what we mean by gender. That's a relationship, which is culturally determined, socially constructed, So what they do, should be emphasized rather than just talking about sex and others. I think it will help.
All right. Any other comment or question or contribution? Then I think we are good to go. Right. Albert, I think you've had some good suggestions from the participants. And try to redirect you. I don't know whether you are finished now, but maybe looking at the issues of publication. can redirect some of the things that they have suggested so that you have a very good paper at the end of the day.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we can have the next presenter. Graham, you were the one who was introduced as a lady yesterday. Okay, go ahead. You have 10 minutes. Now you are not fishing out your presentation. Have you seen it? Okay.
Good morning. My name is Emmanuel Graham Nyameke, MPhil. This is a section of my MPhil thesis that I have drafted for publication, and it has returned from review. This MPhil thesis was supervised by Professor John Windy Ansa, who happens to be my personal father. So this will be the presentation outline. Introduction, a little literature review, findings, proposed solution to the problem, conclusions, and recommendation. We are very much aware in Ghana, because I believe perhaps we all hear things on the news, that nurses have been produced in their numbers in the country. However, the government or the health institution is unable to absorb all the nurses into the local health sector. This makes Mohammed Nuruddin's statement in 2023 significant, that there is nurse unemployment in the country. Having nurse unemployment in the country, Antwi Kwate in 2023 suggested that to resolve the issue generally on labor employment in Africa, African countries should be thinking of exploring the export of labor to countries that have need of their services, since we have them in abundance, if I may use that word. With such happening, one may ask, how does it happen? If countries, which Ghana is part, are supposed to send nurses or export labor, how does it happen? This happens only through regional integrations, which has come for because of globalization. As a result of globalizations, countries have come together to share resources, which economic resources and economic activities all take part within. Within globalization, we also find regional integration, regional blocks. And within these regional blocks, it has not only been limited to political activities organized on the bloc, but also economic activities. So you will see that ECOWAS share resources with member countries. You see that South-South cooperation, the China with the Asian countries, are also sharing their resources, including labor export. So it will not be out of place for Antwi Kwate to say that African countries should explore the export of labor in order to deal with issues of unemployment. So in Africa, we get to realize that Kenya, Uganda are part of the countries that are exploring the export of nurses to UK. And these are mainly done on the issues of bilateral arrangements. This being significant, the United Nations Center for Trade and Development findings in 2017 acknowledged that that becomes a viable means for countries to provide employment and also to contribute to their economic growth. What is the situation in Ghana, I may ask? As we all know, it is noted that 68,800 nurses as at 2020 to 2022 who have finished school are sitting home unemployed. Notwithstanding this huge problem, it is also noted by TEWIA that 2,000 nurses quarterly leave the shores of Ghana, nurse exodus, which is a popular term ringing in our ears every day. If quarterly 2,000 nurses are leaving the shores of Ghana, multiply that and get to know that in a year, about 8,000 nurses are leaving the shores of Ghana. What should we do? Does it call for concern? I believe so. This calls for concern, and academics should interrogate it. As well, myself and my boss, we took it up to interrogate the issues. Interrogating these issues, one may ask, which methodology will be appropriate for us to bring out the issues clearly? Should it be the quantitative perspective that will bring us only issues of the numbers? What about the individual's perspectives? So in order to harness on the strength of these two areas, I adopted the pragmatic philosophy using specifically sequential explanatory design. And by that, the respondents for this study was 483 and 12 participants. Within the 12 participants, I interviewed key informants at the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations. I stand on the shoulders of earlier researchers who have done so much in this area. Abuasi and Abho 2015, Boafo 2016, Edinkra 2021. These studies have looked at nurse trainees' intentions to migrate, workplace violence influencing nurses migrating, and medical students' migrations intentions. However, you could see that these studies have not looked at how the country can mine the export of nurses in order to deal with the issue of unemployment in the situation. Particularly, this study focuses also on bringing to fore policy dimension in the export of nurses. And this will, someone will ask, has Ghana not exported nurses? So why? Yes, Ghana is exporting nurses or is sending nurses. I don't want to use the word exporting nurses because it has not, like in the public space, been acknowledged as such. Ghana is sending nurses to Barbados. However, in the public sphere, you realize that policy, a clear-cut policy, is not known. Recently, in the newspaper, you realize that it has been published that stakeholders should come together to help come up with policy. So this study becomes significant as it seeks to unend the social undercurrents of nurse exploitation, looking at how nurse exploitation could be used by the government to deal with nurse unemployment and also mobilize revenue. Yesterday, one of the presenters in room 3 made it clear that when it comes to the sustainable development goals, the media has not done very well to some of the areas. And one of them happened to be the area that this work will contribute to, the Sustainable Development Goal 8.3, that looks at providing employment opportunity for people. Now we go to the findings of this study. It was found from the qualitative data that nurses are willing to be exported. The quantitative data also displays an interesting story. Already from previous studies, like Edinkra 2021, it is clear that nurse trainees have the migration intention. Now, this study wanted to find out if nurses wanted to be exported. It is different from having the intention to migrate on your own, and also another instance accepting to be exported by a government through some bilateral arrangement. So you needed to explore that perspective. And it came up that from the percentages, you see that there is a higher percentage in terms of the receptivity on the part of the nurses accepting to be exported by the government. Why? The qualitative data makes us understand that the nurses have knowledge of nurse exportation. And they mentioned that in the instance of Kenya, they know that the Kenyan nurses are being sent to the UK to work. And because they have knowledge of nurse exportation in other countries and what comes with it, then they are likely to accept that the government export them. But interestingly, even though the nurses want government to export them, they also are thinking of the nurse-to-patient ratio in the country. Yes, we agree that the government should export us, but the government should take note of the nurse-to-patient ratio. The qualitative data reveals something interesting. While some participants were of the view that government should export us because there are numerous nurses that have not been employed, others are saying that, no, you cannot be thinking of safeguarding someone's health facility in another country while you leave us. So, if you export us to other countries, wait until we have achieved the nurse-to-patient ratio, which is 1:1,000. That is what is recommended by WHO. But the government, I don't know whether it is political or something, is saying that we are doing better at 1:831. Therefore, nurses are of the view that in order to also export nurses, the structure, the nursing training colleges should be restructured. On the quantitative data, you will see various issues interrogated, and they received quite interesting percentages. But in the qualitative data, that is where you get more revelation. What should go into the restructuring of the nursing training colleges? They believe that if we are to restructure the nursing training colleges, one, say expand enrollment. That is, if you were admitting 500 students, now admit about 600, so that you can have more for the local sector and you can have some also for other countries that have need of their services. Others are also of the view that, he says, I'll be glad if the government will formalize the export of nurses. You know why? Because in the data, it reveals that when the government formalizes nurse exportation, the people are going to benefit. And this is in line with the sociological life course approach theory, which states that based on the life situation that occurs in a person's life, the various trajectories, as they affect the human person, it causes the human person to make certain decisions. Then we come to policy dimension. What should go into policy? The nurses were of the view that in order to export the nurses, there should be a clear-cut policy for the export of nurses. It shouldn't be based on any political statement that we are sending nurses, as my data revealed. So, absolutely, I think all nursing colleges also need to be upgraded. As part of the policy, we need to upgrade them. And upgrading them, they were of the view that instead of nursing colleges offering diploma, they should be allowed to also offer degrees. And this is in line with WHO's recommendation that all nursing training colleges should think of improving from the diploma to degree to make the nurses gain good or quality training. Then, from the stakeholders' perspective, the key informants at the two ministries that were interrogated also came up with these findings that we should mainstream nurse export. Mainstreaming nurse exportation, something interesting also came out from the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations. Some of the participants were of the view that the initial agreement with Barbados it says the Ministry of Employment were not involved. So the other aspect of the work, which is not part here, reveals that those in Barbados are facing certain challenges. But the Ministry of Employment, which is to see to it that the people, their problems are resolved, cannot do it because they say they were not involved. So in this revelation, it says when they are mainstreaming this exportation, they should involve them so that they will know what should go into the various charter they will have with the respective countries. And then export should be done based on rotation. So if you are to export nurses, it should be done based on rotation. And this is key. What did they say? They said when you rotate the nurses, that is in a 5 years plan, you send a group to Barbados. 5 years, you bring them back. You send a different group. The qualitative data reveals that doing so, you will be having what we call brain circulation, which will help build our local health sector. That is, you have experienced nurses who have knowledge of other countries and how they practice their health services come to your country to help resolve issues. Then the issue of investing in technology. It says they should incorporate technological training into the training of our nurses, because today, as we know, we are in an AI world, and technology is what is being used to treat most diseases. So it will be important that they are taken through. What is the solution? We have this huge problem on our shoulder. The solution is simple. Institutionalize nurse exportation. While you institutionalize nurse exportation, you are going to implement the export. You are doing that based on policy, and then it will also help always resort the local health sector. And doing so, we must take note from that of the Philippines, that have a whole ministry that looks at diaspora job opportunities. So it could be concluded, therefore, from the study that there was a high receptivity on the part of nurses accepting to be exported. And since there is unemployment in the country and nurses are migrating in their numbers, if government doesn't send nurses abroad, the nurses will move. It is the country that will lose because the country or the government invested in their training. Specifically, based on the findings of this study, therefore, the views of the nurses and stakeholders purport that the export of nurses is an avenue for government to mobilize revenue. And the returnee nurses integrated into the health sector will benefit the health sector. Formulation of policy too is very clear. Recommendations. I recommend that the government, through the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations, should consider formalizing nurse exportation. The government, through these two ministries, should have regulatory framework and policy to guide the export of nurses. And the two ministries should put measures in place to ensure, if rotation is done in the exportation of nurses, that returnee nurses are well integrated. Thank you.
All right. Graham, you are so passionate about your presentation, but we are working with time. It's part of the conference system. So next time, colleagues, the floor is open for comments, questions, contributions. Doc, I should start from somewhere before I come. Any contribution? Yes. Oh, Doc, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you. The chair is right. You are too passionate, and because of that, it's good to be passionate. Because of that, you were saying so many things. The whole thing, because when I read your abstract, it looks very clearer a bit than, because even you introduce a whole philosophy, quantitative, in your study, we're talking about qualitative, right? And you are saying so many things, but let me draw your attention to some few things. So at a point, I got the impression you were interested in migration intentions of nurses. And then, because I'm wondering, because you did not contextualize, you know, your entire study, it's a bit difficult, honestly. Some of the arguments you are making, you know, and you showed us a Likert scale, a Likert, disagree, agree, and then you present a qualitative data in support of disagree, agree. So it's a bit difficult. It's a bit difficult. But let me, it's a bit difficult. I'm not seeing a certain pattern. So what really is the problem? Like, if you can succinctly state, what really is the problem?
Okay. The problem is that there is one, nurse unemployment in the country. Two, nurses are moving in their numbers. And three, you find the issue that government has begun an initiation upon the invitation of the Barbados Prime Minister, sent some nurses to that island. However, in terms of policy to guide such initiative, it was absent. So this study therefore seeks or sought to look at how the export of nurses, which is being done in other countries, could be done in Ghana as a way to deal with nurse unemployment and also mobilize revenue for the government. Thank you, Doc. Yeah.
Can I add something to what you're saying?
My hand is
Which category of nurses?
my hand has been up, Chairman. Thank you.
So
Thank
you,
you.
I think it's continuing from where.
But my hand has been up.
Yes.
You got the chair, so I don't know.
You wait.
Okay, go on.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think, though I didn't come early enough, but I'm trying to understand. I want to chair a session, actually. I just came from a session. I think I'm getting you a bit clear. So nurses are leaving the country, right? The government has planned that movement between Ghana and Barbados, right? And there's no policy to guide the movement. That's somehow understandable. So maybe, for me, I'm not getting you. So is that a problem? Is that a problem?
Yes, please.
So perhaps that's where you can kind of prioritize the study. Government has kind of planned with Barbados authorities to have nurses move from Ghana to Barbados. but there's no any official document, initiative to control, if you like, govern such movement. And maybe in other countries, there are such working documents to guide such movements. So yes, there's some sense coming up. So I think for me, I'm getting somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Obi,
My point was, yes, like you said, everybody wants to live. Yes, we see the beauty of those countries, and everybody wants to go and enjoy it. But however, people come with large sums of money, they build, and then all kinds of things happen to us. You know the effect of migration. And I wanted to know which type of ethnicity did you interview? Is it that those in employment, those who have passed licensure and are waiting posting, or those who are in the training colleges?
Thank you. I interviewed 3 different people. Those who are working, those who are on the verge of completing, and those who had finished school and were not employed.
And so for those who are awaiting employment, don't you think that their tendency to say, yes, government must export us, will be greater than those who are already in employment? Or when you rank them, there was a balance?
It turned out to be interesting. Those who were even employed turned out to say yes, and the qualitative data explained why. And I love the concern of Dr. Fiave, because I said this is just a section of the work. In the work, it came up that, yes, like I said, Teria acknowledged that those leaving 2,000 quarterly leave their shores. These are people who are working, employed, but they leave. Now, if those who are employed are leaving, they have been trained by the government. Government have made resources or has put in resources to train them, and then they are also leaving the country. Then it calls for also a worry. In some countries, like the Philippines, you realize that there is a whole institution that deals with diaspora work. So even if you are working as a lecturer and maybe you want to look for a job, let's say you are looking for a job in the maybe US, and then you pass through that ministry, then the ministry regulates the work, look for even the work for you, so that when you go, they know. It also helps the country to track where their citizens are, and also brings back some kind of revenue. So one aspect of this work is looking at putting checks in place to ensure that even when our citizens go out there to work, we know they will be in safe hands through bilateral kind of arrangements. And the other side is that if we are still to export, before I end, it will interest you to know that even those that were sent to Barbados, they were all working. Those that were sent to Barbados, they were all working. So if we are to send people also outside, and there is no policy guiding the export, like one of the participants at the Ministry of Employment asked me, where is the money going to? The money coming from the Barbados ministry part. Where is it going to? He says, because it has been 3 years since they left. It has not been accounted for. So if there is no policy to regulate how things are supposed to be done, then what becomes of it? That is why this study sought to kill that one bird with 2 stones.
Okay. Graham, you have made your point. So let's listen to Prof. Tona, and perhaps
Okay, I think, sorry. thanks for the paper. I think the problem is coming because you are trying to mix two things. The title of your paper and from what you have explained is actually more about whether we should continue with this individual approach to migration of nurses, or there should be a state organized as is done in the Philippines, or we even know from Cuba, Cuban doctors brought to Ghana, they are brought by their state, they stay for 2 to 3 years. There is a policy agreement with Ghana government, and so on and so forth. And I think you are questioning. First, you give us the introduction as we have the nurses. They do not have a job. Many are trying to leave. So I think your focus should remain on what are the benefits? How do we likely, will we get, if we formalize the export of nurses rather than the individual migration approach that we have been doing? So, and I want to support that because it will strengthen the, you know, we have a lot of studies already on the migration of nurses on another health potential professionals. Techiwa Menu in the 80s and many others, particularly from migration. They gave us studies on health professionals leaving, doctors, nurses, and all from that sector. But their approach was looking at the motivation. What motivates the individual? Why are they going? Where do they go to? What are the numbers? And so on. So individual migration intentions. Now, in this, your presentation, I think it will be very good if you can tell us. It looks we have done it once with Barbados. There is little information. We have only been informed. We don't know state of progress. We don't know that kind of thing. So there is no policy. So your focus should then be what kind of policies should we put in place? How should it look like if we want to formalize the exportation of nurses? What kind of nurses are we going to send? What are the likely benefits? And what are we going to lose? So yours, I see it more as a policy decision, and then on the part of the state. And of course, you will be making a contribution then to this discussion on export of health professionals. So that will be a good, but then I'll put a question mark. We don't seem to have, we have sent 200 people, but doesn't seem to be a policy out of it. It looked like we did it because the Barbados government requested our government, and then we assembled people, nurses, those who were interested, you go. But we have not, that was the approach. We have not thought about it. What kind of people, then that is where your point, if I'm to conclude, on the kind of training, if you are going to be sent to the UK, or to South Africa, these are different. If you are going to the UK, what kind of nurses and what training should we give them? And those kind of things, they are going to be different. What kind of hospitals? And then, so the whole entire chain, is it going to be a circulatory? Are they going forever? As many of these individual nurses who have left to the UK have done. It looks like it's forever. There's no, so how can we organize that to the benefit of Ghana? And if you go to this policy angle, then you'll be making there's a gap there. You'll be making a useful contribution to the discussion on the organized export of nurses, not from the migration approach, where it looks like it was individual intentions and organized individually. People just leave to the UK or to the US on their own. So that is where I see the strength of the paper in that year. So thanks. And
Okay. Prof has given us a summary of all that we have been saying, right? So I'll also just add that this era is the migration era. Because almost everybody is going from all sectors, even teachers and all those people. So that some of the answers that you got from the nurses, they are the answers you get. Because everybody wants to go out. Okay, but like looking at the policy issues, that will maybe shift the argument to another level, rather than looking at it generally as you did, right? So Prof has given you good ideas, and then you can go back and then look at your paper. Okay, thank you very much, Grima, for coming. To present. Yes. Oh, what? He came and I asked